Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to an episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am here with Arun Mehta from the Arun Mehta Show. Welcome back, Arun.
Hey, I thought I'd just stay up with you a bit later because obviously I was trying to get over jet lag from going over to America. Thought I'd spend some time with you and talk about something pretty interesting.
Yeah. So we watched Frozen 2 the other day, and then we came up with the idea about, let's look back on the original Frozen that came out around 2013, and let's see how it compares to the sequel. So, yeah, I think that for the most part, when we saw the trailer for Frozen, we didn't really think much of it because it was a really mediocre trailer. It didn't really, say anything of what the story was about.
Yeah, and it's just, are we talking about the first Frozen or the second Frozen?
Yeah, the first one, yeah.
Yeah, the first Frozen was basically just kind of like generic Disney princess, kind of like, Disney's going to try and do this again and try and do it in 3D this time. And so it's like, because I think they were reeling, a little bit from The Princess and the Frog. I think, weren't they, at that time? And,
so basically, for those who are wondering about, how did we get to Frozen? How did this come to be? So, long story short, Frozen has Disney wanted to do an adaptation of the Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen ever since the 30s. He wanted to have this as one of the first animated adaptations, even before Snow White, if you can believe it. Mm-hmm. So Disney and Samuel Goldwyn from MGM Studios wanted to collaborate so that they can be able to do both animated segments and a live action segment featuring the story of Hans Christian Andersen. But then World War II broke off and they weren't able to complete that. And so it was kind of sitting on the shelf for over 70 years. And then finally around the early 2000s, that was when they decided, the early 2010s, that was when they decided to bring back the concept of the Snow Queen. So we already had The Princess and the Frog in 2009, and then we had Tangled that followed up with that. And Tangled did a lot better than Princess and the Frog, and that basically showed Disney, I guess, nobody cares about 2D anymore. Let's just switch over to 3D because apparently, that's what everybody wants. And so here we have with Frozen. And Frozen, when it first came out, my goodness, it became this massive, huge cultural icon, right away. It made so much money at the time that it even rivaled or even surpassed The Lion King and Finding Nemo with the amount of money that it made in the box office and with DVD sales. And at a time, you couldn't go to a Disney store or any store that didn't have Frozen merchandise.
Well, this was like their big. This was a big thing for Disney. This was like the first. I mean, obviously they had Tiana and they had Rapunzel, but I mean, I think this was going to be. I think this was a standout thing. I think for Disney for them to do because obviously it was a completely new story, something completely different, and it was. It kind of had that kind of like big epic feel. I think obviously when Disney were building it up, kind of like Cinderella, kind of like maybe even like Snow White, and even kind of you could probably maybe compare it to Belle from Beauty and the Beast. So this was a big thing as well. And also on top of that as well, like Disney, as far as I'm aware, have never really done a queen as like one of the major characters of a movie. So I mean, obviously that was a bit of a change for pace because they've always been princesses. Obviously there's some tropes that are involved in that. Obviously, Wreck-It Ralph 2 obviously makes a big deal of the tropes in Disney princesses, but I think this was going to be something very different. I think it had a very different feel, I think, towards it. And when it came out, everyone took to it. Like it was, it was mainly the songs. It was a mainly musical thing. It was basically Disney doing what they normally do, but obviously reaching out to a lot of people at the same time. So yeah, it's kind of weird because it kind of feels like Disney really didn't do anything different, from their kind of like usual forte. I mean, it wasn't like like the Black Cauldron or anything like that. It was what you would expect to see in a Disney film, and it was a formula that we're already kind of familiar with from the Renaissance era, going up to now. I mean, there was nothing, at least in my opinion, nothing unique about Frozen, but my goodness, the songs were catchy, the presentation of it was great, the voice actors did an incredible job. Olaf was not annoying. Because, you look at those pictures of Olaf and you thought, oh my god, this guy's going to be loud and obnoxious, and this is going to be like Eddie Murphy on steroids.
Yeah.
I know it was like but he was calm and collected. He was a calm and collected guy, and his punchlines actually delivered without having to kind of be ridiculous and crazy. And also so he kind of had this kind of southern tone to it, and he even put in some good action scenes as well. You felt how sharp those spikes were when Elsa was doing all that stuff with the ice and everything like that, and you realize how dangerous this kind of like this what Anna what Elsa could do, and you felt the danger around her as well, and so there was a lot of mystery in that, and there was a lot of there was a lot to take in, I think, with Frozen. So it's not as flat, I think, as some critics give it. I mean, in regards to it being like, one of the greatest Disney films of all time, I would have to walk on that, to be honest with you. But I mean, you can see the appeal. Like, it's a Disney film through and through, and it took to the audience and basically turned into this massive phenomenon. And the song "Let It Go" was obviously made a massive contribution to that.
Yeah, for sure. And I was looking back on like animated films that came out in 2013, and my goodness, Frozen was the only one that stood out because everything else that came out was just either mediocre or just downright awful. I remember many years ago when there was like this talks about like, oh, what's Disney going to do? Is Disney going to be able to deliver delivers like a really epic movie that can be able to get away the mediocrity that we already went through with all the animated films? I actually have a list right here of the films that came out in 2013, and oh man, it's just like, the fact that Frozen came out around that time is a miracle. We had Escape from Planet Earth, we had Epic, Monsters University, we had Planes, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2, Freebirds, and Walking with Dinosaurs. And we did have some pretty decent ones that we talked about before in Dream Machine, like The Croods and Turbo. And then there was also Despicable Me 2. But yeah, for the most part, Frozen was the one that stood out amongst everything else that came out that year.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, if some, act of fate, had brought, a better movie. Wasn't there any movies that were delayed from that year that then got released into the next year and probably
Yes.
in 2014?
Yeah, pretty much, yes.
Because if that was the case, some movies actually appeared in 2013 with Frozen, and sometimes and came out again also on the same day. Someone pulled a Don Bluth and decided to release something that people would have taken to. Like, would Frozen have stood the time? I mean, obviously we can play hindsight games and things like that, but Frozen in that year obviously stood out massively from the rest of the competition, and I doubt people. Here's the thing: Monsters University, no one was asking for a prequel to Monsters Inc. That's number one. In regards to the Croods, I mean, obviously we've and also Turbo as well. Like, I mean, they were more like for the Croods, to me, it was just an average film, and the Turbo did surprise me, a little bit with some of the content that it had in there, even though it didn't get all that well from the critics. But I mean, in regards to like everything else out there, yeah, I mean, like Despicable Me 2, I mean, I never really was into Despicable Me, to be quite honest with you, even though I kind of like followed, lightly the franchise. But
Sure.
yeah, so again, I agree with you. Frozen kind of, it made its bed in 2013. It obviously, did really well in that year, but obviously, yeah, its release schedule and I think everything around it kind of played in its favor.
Yeah, it did play a lot into its favor. And yeah, we have to talk about like some of the people behind it. So obviously, the people who wrote the music was, Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez. And, you probably remember Robert Lopez, who was the co-creator of Avenue Q, and he also wrote a lot of the music for it.
hmm And the thing about, I mean, this is probably like one of those local hero moments, like where the soundtrack. I mean, as far as I'm aware, Let It Go is what we've been listening to more than than people actually play the movie, as far as I'm aware. So
Yeah, yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah, this is one of the cases in which like the song is going to be just as popular or maybe even slightly more popular than the movie. Like we've had songs out there like Lead Us to a Place that came originally from Quest for Camelot that is going to be far remembered as a song on its own as opposed to like, oh, that came from Quest for Camelot.
yeah, like you said, the reason I say local hero moment is because the local hero movie, like the soundtrack outsold the actual movie itself. Mark Knopfler, who sang in a very popular band called Dire Straits. I mean, he wrote the music for that movie, and so obviously it's in a lot of people's collections now, and a lot of people's vinyl collections as well. And so and also the fact that Newcastle United, the football team, still uses it as like their music for like when the team comes out. So like the theme is more iconic than the actual movie that it's actually playing out to.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have, a lot of the people who wrote on it. So we have, Jennifer Lee and Chris Buck, who were the directors. And Jennifer Lee not only co-wrote Frozen, but she also has the honor of being the very first female director for Disney. And, she would also work on many other movies. She would work on Wreck-It Ralph. She would work on Zootopia. And then eventually she would work on Frozen 2, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Yeah,
It's
go
kind of
ahead.
shows how far Disney had come as well, because like we all hear about the horrible stories about female actresses being paid terribly and also being locked into contracts where they can never perform again. And then we see her situations where women aren't allowed to work in the animation department, things like that. We've heard some horror stories from Disney in regards to gender equality, and now here we have.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. Because I recently watched a documentary about Floyd Norman, who was the very first African American animator on Disney, where he worked on Sleeping Beauty and Sword in the Stone, Jungle Book, all those kind of movies. And he even talked about like, Disney wasn't always like a progressive studio because the women were paid far, far less than the men. So yeah, even back then, even though that women did work for Disney when the company was just starting off, they didn't get any recognition or any appreciation for their work as compared to the men.
yeah, well, there's some very controversial things said about Walt Disney himself. So maybe like the very discriminative practices of Disney. I think also go to the man himself, unfortunately. So those stories still
Yeah.
like. So yeah. So.
Exactly. And then we have Chris Buck, who worked on films such as Tarzan and Pocahontas. And then afterwards, he would go over to Sony, where he worked on the Surf's Up movies. But then finally, he came back to Disney to work on Frozen. And yeah, and then eventually, we have, as mentioned earlier, about, Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez. They also helped with the story in addition to the music. And then we have the main actors. We have Kristen Bell, whom many people would probably know as the main lead of Veronica Mars. And then Idina Menzel, who a lot of people at the time may have known for not only being as Elphaba in the Wicked Broadway musical, but also she was one of the main characters in Enchanted. We'll talk about Enchanted in a minute. And then you have Josh Gad, who, some people at the time knew him as acting in the Book of Mormon, the musical that Trey Parker and you have Trey Parker, like one of the writers for, and Matt Stone. And also, this is when, this was like one of his first major roles that kind of made him stand out, because he would be in like most of the Disney movies afterwards. He was in the live action Beauty and the Beast. He came back to, being Olaf in the sequel, and he would do so many other movies afterwards. And then finally, last but not least, we have Jonathan Groff, who again on Broadway, you may probably know him as, King George III in Hamilton, and also he was in Spring Awakening. But yeah, I think that for the most part, most people nowadays know him as Kristoff, and I think that this is definitely taken into the similarities to what happened with Tangled, in which they brought in a lot of Broadway actors to portray the roles as opposed to celebrities, and they kind of did that as well with Princess and the Frog, where they had a mixture of like singers and celebrities, but. This is, Tangled was one of the first that really, like, got into the sense of, like, let's not focus on the celebrity aspect anymore. Let's just focus on, like, getting real people who act in the business, who are excellent singers and performers. Let's get them into these Disney movies. And, we've been following in that kind of trend ever since.
Yeah, but, for these actors and actresses, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because kind of like, I'm going to star in this Disney movie, and I'm not a big-name celebrity, but hey, this is going to be my chance to get on the side. But, as of this recording, the guy who played Aladdin in the live-action remake, apparently he did an interview where he says he's struggling to get auditions now.
Yeah, I heard that as well. Like, he hasn't gotten a single audition after he performed, and that's a real shame, because from what I've heard, he did a really good job.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, I still think it's not as good as the obviously you and I are going to say that the animated the live action movies aren't as good as the animated versions. We know we're going to have a bias towards that, but
sure.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, top of that, it's Will Smith's, highest grossing movie, and so, he kind of says a little bit about his acting. Unfortunately, he says quite a bit about his acting career when you really think about that. But, the fact that Will Smith, I think, was probably the headline banner on this movie, and everyone else was an afterthought. I'm not going to say it was. It is unfortunate that people are going to walk into movies and Disney films, they're going to do really, really successful, and then all of a sudden they find themselves kind of like being typecast to like this particular person, and they're not going to get any further. Like, obviously we've seen it with Adam West, we've seen it with Mark Hamill, and it's like, and then eventually they would further on in their careers they would eventually get on, like Mark Hamill eventually will become the Joker, and then obviously you get Adam West eventually getting into Family Guy, obviously doing his shtick, but. Yeah, it's a shame really that Disney. You've now actors and actresses, have these really big opportunities to like do, the next big Disney film. But then after they've done the next big Disney film, they wonder what are they actually going to get any work after that, and or are they just going to basically be banking on being that character for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, which is a real shame, to be quite honest, because, very similar to what you were saying about Adam West and even William Shatner. It's like, after they try to get work, everything else that they try to get, it's like they're always going to be compared to their most famous characters. And it kind of like makes their career incredibly stagnant. I mean, Aaron, you and I, we watched Charlie and the Chocolate Factory around Thanksgiving, and we were watching Christopher Lee as Willy Wonka's father. And I was talking to you about how for a while, Christopher Lee was typecast to being Dracula in all the Hammer movies. He tried to step out of it, but there was like this typecasting that he would go through where everybody was going to compare him to Dracula. Everybody was going to see him as like, oh, you're the guy who played as Dracula. And then he would go on to all these horror films. But it wasn't until like the late 90s and 2000s where he kind of broke away from that typecast as, oh, I'm going to be in like all these horror films and I'm going to be, the main character of Dracula, where he would play as Sauron from Lord of the Rings and Count Dooku from Star Wars.
Well, he kind of like, in a way, he kind of did and kind of didn't, because he was still seen as a villain. Like, obviously Dracula was like, the major villain of the monster franchises. And so, in that regard, he did somewhat step out of the light in that way. But at the end of the day, like, your Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I think, was kind of like his, a bit of his redemption. Because in a way, he wasn't, obviously he had his motivations in that film. But, in a way, you could say that he was somewhat kind of like maybe had some kind of villainous intent in the way he dealt with Willy Wonka in that film. But Christopher Lee, it's great that he found his way out of Dracula, and it's just unfortunate he didn't find himself out of the way of being an antagonist.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. Anyway, so I guess for the most part, we can get into the discussion of the movie. So, yeah, I think that for the most part, you have the relationship between Anna and Elsa when they're little kids, with Elsa having her ice powers and Anna is playing around, but then they'll have this unfortunate accident where Elsa struck her, and then they go over to the trolls where they removed her memory of what happened. And you have the first song, well, one of the first songs in the movie where you have the how to, do you want to build a snowman, which I heard in Did You Know Movies video that they struggled on whether they should keep this song or not, and then they decided to remove it, but then they decided, hey, let's put it in at the very last minute. So yeah, we almost were really close to not even getting that song at all.
Hmm. And it's I mean, and also it was a good move to keep it in there because at the end of the day, like it was one of the the not the I mean it was one of the songs that actually built the story, on where it all started off and how it all turned out, and obviously then gave us the setting for the rest of the movie. So it was a very integral song at the end of the day. Like I'm sure if they did that out of kind of out of the tune, I don't think it would have had the same impact.
And then eventually we have the story where the parents, they go off and they were going to be going over to this visiting kingdom, and then they died. And then Elsa eventually becomes the queen of Arendelle, which I remember, I mean, we'll talk about this more further in Frozen 2, but I remember there was this theory that was going on that, the reason why, Anna and Elsa's parents were leaving was because they were actually going to go see Rapunzel's wedding. Because, there's this whole Disney cinematic universe that we need to connect everything to, and the sunken ship from the Anna and Elsa's parents was actually the sunken ship from the Little Mermaid that Ariel was discovering in, because we can assume that because Hans Christian Andersen was from Denmark, that Arendale is in Denmark, and so then we have the Little Mermaid, which was also set in Denmark because of the same author as well. So hey, let's see if we can be able to connect everything together. And because Tangle was the most recent movie at the time, and I believe it was in I forget which country it was taking place in, but I think that it was in somewhere around Europe, and they said, hey, maybe we can be able to like put all these things together, and it's complicated.
Yeah, I'm glad they're not retconning any of it either. Like, I mean, it's like, I mean, obviously the future movies are always going to have these little references in, but I'm really glad they're not going to the effort of like saying, oh, hey, well, now that the Little Mermaid has this, so now that Frozen has this Little Mermaid reference in, maybe we should probably go back into Little Mermaid and put in some like little Anna and Elsa references or something like that. I'm really glad they haven't, gone to that. I'm glad they haven't gone into George Lucas mode in regards to doing that. But
oh no, oh god, no. Okay, let me get this straight. So we're going to have a Little Mermaid special edition where the ship is actually going to look like the ship, and maybe we'll have like a scene in which when maybe like one of the sailors from the Little Mermaid, when they're celebrating Eric's birthday, is actually one of the members from Arendelle.
Patricia, I mean, stop giving them ideas, please. Like, just let's not tamper with the fabric. I mean, it's perfectly good the way it is. No more fabric softener, please.
Okay, fine.
Well, so yeah, in regards to like that, I mean, like it is getting to the point where they are trying to tie everything together. And it makes you wonder, in the next movie whether there's going to be like, an end credit scene where Samuel L. Jackson walks in and says, they're going to make them all into a team or something like that. So it is getting to that point. And and here's the thing about this. I know it's switching gears a little bit from Frozen, but I mean, somewhere down the line they are going, and also Wreck-It Ralph 2, in regards to that, everyone was basically wanting to see the princesses all get, do their thing in action. I think somewhere down the line, Disney is going to gear up for like a Disney princess movie and get all the Disney princesses together and basically have this like massive fight or something like that, So it's. I think it's if Disney doesn't if Disney doesn't do it, then I don't know what they're going to do. But I mean, because it looks pretty obvious at this point where Disney are obviously trying to tie things together with the modern movies, that it looks to me that somewhere down the line they're going to basically say, oh hey, here's here is Belle, here is Ariel, here is Tiana, here is Anna and Elsa, and here is all these Disney princesses, and say, look, they're all here. Here's this movie. Here's the date. And they're going to make a lot of money out of it, I think, because everyone's going to want to see these princesses, I think.
we have had the Disney princesses collaborate with one another. There's the Disney princess line where they have like these DVDs where you see the princesses come together and they do activities and they sing songs. Sophia the First also has crossovers with the Disney princesses as well when she calls them into her amulet. And I guess the closest thing that I can think of at the moment where we have the princesses and the Disney characters and the villain together is Descendants. You know, that live action TV movie from the Disney Channel where you have the offspring of the Disney princesses and the villains are coming together and they go to this school and, you know, they're kind of separated towards, you know, the villains go on this in this city and the good guys are in this city and then they come together and all that stuff. So yeah, that's the only equivalent I can think of, but I wouldn't be surprised that if maybe in the future, very similar to what you were saying about Wreck-It Ralph 2, that we would see something like that happen.
Yeah, I mean, they should again. I think it's going to be something they're going to build up towards. I think yeah, it won't be too surprising if and on top of that as well, if they release it on Disney, if they decide, oh hey, we're releasing the movie, we're going to release it on Disney Plus, there's going to be like 1 million subscribers. I probably imagine after that,
yeah,
just
absolutely.
just to see that. So like Disney have got they got great franchises. They got Frozen, and they got some they got all their other properties as well. So they've got the opportunity to do this big thing. So I'm surprised they haven't pushed the button right now because obviously they're currently got the massive hype around Frozen at the moment. So
Yes. So basically, yeah, we have the coronation with Elsa being the queen, and then you have all the kingdoms coming in together, and Anna and Elsa are experiencing people for the first time because they've been so cooped up in the palace and being protective. With Elsa having to stay away from people because she has no control of her ice powers, and then Anna is just being overwhelmed with all these people, and then she meets up with Hans for the first time, and then they have this song "Love Is an Open Door" where they immediately fall in love, and then you have that great line from Elsa where she tells Anna that you cannot marry a man that you first met.
Mm-hmm. And it's like it's aware of its time. I think it's like how many movies have we had where women find men and within about 40-50 minutes all of a sudden they're in a relationship.
Yeah, that is pretty much every single Disney princess movie. Snow White
movie, even looking at Ratatouille, like one of I think the third best grossing Pixar movie of all time. Like even Linguini and Colette just kind of start getting it on, within 30 minutes. It's something that seems to follow Disney, not just outside of its Disney princesses, but kind of follows it's kind of a movie trip that kind of goes around all the chick flicks and all the Christmas movies and things like that. It's something we see far too often.
Yeah, and once again we have to bring up Enchanted. So we have the scene in Enchanted where we have the prince meeting up with the peasant girl Giselle, and then when they meet up for the first time, there's this lovely song, and then the prince picks her up and they start singing this ballad together, and then he asks for her name, and then he said, "Oh, Giselle, what a beautiful name. We shall be married in the morning." And so then they continue off with the song, and then throughout the movie, Giselle ends up into New York City where she meets up with this, down-to-earth businessman with his daughter, and then she starts learning about that, happily ever after is not going to be just granted to you. You have to be able to work on it, and all the singing and all the happy personality that she showed off throughout the movie is completely changed when she's interacting with the guy. And then we have the prince trying to go after Giselle. That way he can be able to rescue her from his stepmother, who's the evil queen, because of course she is. Mm-hmm. And then, there's this, basically it's like making fun of the Disney tropes of the 40s, with, Snow White and Cinderella, where, the princess is a damsel in distress and all that kind of stuff. And, she falls in love with the first guy that she meets, and he just so happens to be a prince. And, then they change things around. They make fun of the tropes and the cliches. And, the princess actually saves the prince and the businessman from the evil stepmother who turns into a dragon, because of course she does. So, yeah, Enchanted was definitely the first Disney movie at that point where it made fun of its cliches and its tropes, and it was well aware of it. And Frozen definitely carries into that same thing. And it's kind of ironic because Idina Menzel was also in Enchanted, and she played as the girlfriend to the businessman who would eventually fall in love with the prince. So it's actually pretty interesting of how how much how much Frozen were to like make fun of that, especially with the scene in which when Anna falls in love with Hans and saying about like she wants to fall in love with the man that she first met, and he's a prince and all that kind of stuff, and about like true love, about breaking the spell that we see later in the movie, which actually kind of falls into this really interesting twist. And then of course we have the plot twist of who the villain is. And this would definitely be following up in pretty much a lot of the Disney movies that would come out in the next 10 years, about like the twist villain of, who it is. It's not an obvious villain. It's supposed to be a person that we trust, but it turns out is the bad guy the entire time.
Yeah, so it's like I mean, in regards to like the average time of a relationship, let me tell you this to everybody: if you're in a committed relationship right now, I guarantee you, if it went the same speed as like the average time that a typical Disney movie in regards to love, things like that, I guarantee you, if your relationship went at that pace, you'd be talking to your partner about where your grandchildren are going to college. It's like that's how quickly these relationships seem to go in these movies. So,
Yeah. And even though like the twist villain was already around before Frozen, I mean, we already had like Toy Stories 2 and 3 already did that, but a Disney movie, like a traditional Disney movie, had like your standard villain. Like you knew who was going to be the villain in the movie. You already knew that the evil stepmother was going to be the villain, or Ursula, or Jafar, or Scar, or anything like that. So the fact that we were able to see that pulled off in Frozen was actually pretty interesting. And that would be like one of the first times we would have that, because in Princess and the Frog we had Dr. Facilier, aka the Shadow Man, and in Tangle we had Mother Gothel. So yeah, basically Frozen was the one that kind of like led the edge towards like, we need to have a surprise villain because apparently everybody loves that. So we had that with Wreck-It Ralph, we had that with Zootopia, and then we had that with Moana, and then eventually we would have that again with all the other Disney movies that would come out since then. I'm actually curious about, I mean, we talked about this in Dream Machine, that they're going to bring back Shrek. I'm actually curious about how are they going to pull this off, because you remember what the original Shrek was. The original Shrek was essentially making fun of the Disney tropes and cliches. But now that Disney is doing it themselves, they have to come up with a way that they can be able to make fun of the new Disney tropes and cliches. Like, I'm actually curious to see if they were able to do that.
yeah, you know what? I was always wonder, like, with the surprise villains, it makes me wonder how long is it going to be? In a couple of years' time, are actually going to go back to, a scene where, like, oh, I wonder who the villain is, and then all of a sudden, there comes this guy with like, this really shady mustache. He's cackling, laughing. He's shooting one gun in another and drowning a puppy in another. Like, we're going to go back to like the really obvious villain. Somewhere down the line, I think, after we're done with the surprise villains.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that were to be the case. That would be like really that would I guess it would be like a refreshing change of pace. It's like, oh, the guy with the twirly mustache and drowning puppies was the bad guy all along. Of course it was.
I don't know. I think the way things are going right now, they probably look at it and think, that guy should be our president. So like, yeah.
Oh, geez. All right, let's continue. So then, we have, Elsa running away from Arendelle because she revealed that she had ice powers. And she runs away in fear, and then Anna wants to go after her so that she can be able to bring her back to Arendelle. But then we have Anna having to bring back Elsa much quickly, because even though it takes place around the summertime, it's because Elsa was able to release her powers, like when she was running off, it actually made it turn into winter. And so then she's like, oh man, I have to bring back Elsa right before everybody starts freezing to death.
Mm-hmm. And it's just it's interesting to see, like, obviously there's some people that say that there's obvious symbolism in all of this, like Elsa's trying her best to control her powers, and she's just trying to like contain herself, and then obviously she goes off into the wilderness, and then obviously that's nowhere to go, and she just kind of accepts who she is in a way. And so like I mean, there's an obvious symbolism in all of this, but I mean, in regards to this is like something that keep in mind, like, they're still teenagers in this, pretty much. I mean, obviously they're a bit older than that now, but obviously
Sure,
they're.
sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're going. You could argue that this is kind of like, saying that, oh, hey, these are two girls who are like on, totally different for one another, and which is actually really good storytelling because, as Craig has told me, in our various Hey Arnold anniversary show interviews, he's basically said, you need to have conflict in there to tell a good story, and so they built that conflict up pretty well because you got Anna who wants to, be out in the world and is so fascinated by everything and wants the doors open and everything like that, and then you got Elsa who's like, reserved and wants to keep herself to herself and wants to keep the door closed, So, like, this is one thing also I think I give credit also for Frozen as well, is that it does its best to actually create the elements for conflict in this. It's so that's good. That's good storytelling right off the bat. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so, while, Elsa is, running off, and then we have Anna meeting up with Kristoff, and we saw him earlier in the movie when it was first starting off, where, Kristoff was helping drag ice from the frozen rivers, and he meets up with Sven, and then later on, he would be raised by the trolls when his parents died, and so then we have him riding around in his sled, and he's helping out Anna being able to find Elsa, and then she starts telling him the stories about, like, how she's already betrothed to be married because she met up with this prince, and then he goes for the same thing that Elsa said about, like, you're gonna marry a guy you just met, so that they're bringing that joke again. And then finally we have Elsa singing the infamous Let It Go song, which I did. So we have to talk about Elsa for a second. So in The Snow Queen, if you ever read the book, the Snow Queen is the villain of the book. And the focus of the book is about, like, these two kids, and they see, like, this magic mirror or something. And so basically they were using, when they were trying to do the Snow Queen adaptation back in the early 30s, they were trying to find a way that they can be able to make it more adaptable to the original story.
In modern adaptations that they did years later, like they were even trying to make her the villain then, because if you remember in the concept trailer, like they had her as like you had Kristoff and you had Anna, like, struggling to get up a mountain and trying to escape from that time Elsa, and so even then during like the when they tried to bring the story back, even the concept trailers, they were even trying to make her the villain at that point. But then obviously they changed the course and decided, oh hey, she's going to be one of the protagonists now.
Yeah, so. and this was, and when they were doing that concept art, Anna and Elsa were not even related. It was just like Anna and Kristoff, and they were fighting off against Elsa. And so, around the 11th hour, that was when Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee came up with the idea about, like, I think she should be a more sympathetic person. Let's make her as one of the princesses, and let's make Anna and Elsa sisters. And so that's when they decided to do that. And when Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez heard about this, that's when they decided to write the song Let It Go. And it took them like 3 days to do it. And so then we even have the sequence in which when she's, building up a castle in the mountains, and apparently that took like 11 months to do, and they were able to get inspiration from this hotel in Canada that is completely made out of ice and snow. And you can definitely tell that they put a lot of work into this. I remember when I saw it in the theaters, I was just blown away by the detail of the ice and the snow that was put into Frozen, especially when you have the scene in which when Anna and Kristoff go into the forest and they see like the snow in the ground, and they have the icicles that are like curtains. I thought it was just beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder, like, if somewhere down the line, if they start, I mean, let's face it, I think they are going to be making Frozen films, for the foreseeable future, the way things are going at the moment. But it makes me wonder if they actually are going to somewhere create a conflict between, Anna and Elsa, and so, then you have to basically, like pick a side, or not like, not exactly like the Prince of Egypt, where you can actually, put them basically both the sisters in a situation where you can sympathize with their sides and you can see where they're coming from, but at the end of the day, one basically has to fall and one basically has to succeed. So it'd be interesting to see if they decide to play them off against each other in another film somewhere down the line. So.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go into the character of Olaf. So, in the beginning of the movie, we have Anna and Elsa playing with each other in the snow in the palace and the ice, and that's just when Elsa builds Olaf, and then she says the line, I am Olaf. I like warm hugs. And so that's when we even have the scene in which when Elsa was building up the castle during Let It Go, and then you have the snowman coming to life, and then it meets up with Anna and Kristoff, and then we get introduced to, Olaf, and he wants to be able to, go through the summertime, even though that he doesn't know he's going to be melting. And then we even have that song where he sings about like wanting to experience the warm summer air and the summer breeze, and just like experiencing it for the first time. And it's like you said before, I thought that Olaf was going to be annoying. I thought that he was going to be this character who was just going to simply tell all these stupid jokes, and he was simply just going to like slow the movie down with just constant joke after joke after joke. I think that we've kind of like were burned out at that point with like these, side characters, because there used to be a lot of them around the 90s. Like you had like if I can think of any of that, like Disney used to like utilize them a lot. We had like with Sebastian, and then eventually with like Cogsworth and Lumiere, and then Timon and Pumbaa, and then as time went on they started to like it was like complete overboard with all these animal sidekicks.
So when you've seen Olaf basically being this like, and I imagine if he was written by Sony Animation Studios, they would have him basically saying all like the all those catchphrases from like at that time, and they become very dated jokes, and you can tell him he's trying to play to the modern audience, if you will, and maybe probably singing a song by AC/DC or something like that, or like doing like a rap number or something, something along the.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, I can imagine with like the movie coming out in like 2013, they'll probably do like a Gangnam Style or Harlem Shake or something. That would have been so awful.
You can see why, and even like how you had like you remember the movie The Nut Job, obviously they had that Gangnam Style reference, and I would have seen, even though Frozen would have nothing to do with with Psy or Gangnam Style or anything like that, or South Korea for that matter, you could see some executives saying, oh, you should really stick that in because that's what the kids like nowadays.
Yeah.
It's really you give Frozen credit for. At least some of the stuff that you find in this movie, you could play at any part of the year. Like it's like its story is solid enough to at least say, oh hey, I can we'll still probably be talking about Frozen now. I'm probably still talking about it maybe like in 2020, like in 2030 probably, and like it is one of those movies that can stand the test of time. In my opinion.
It is actually, yeah, and. I think that's because it was able to play in a smart way about like let's not add these pop culture references into our movies. Let's just make it a little bit more timeless, like the Disney movies of the past. Like you can go back and watch movies such as Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin or Snow White or Cinderella, and you can be able to appreciate them for what they did in storytelling wise and character wise and song wise. They don't have to worry about like, oh, we're just gonna add in these jokes because this is what the kids like. I mean, lest we forget about Chicken Little.
Mm-hmm. And it's well, Chicken Little tried to be Shrek. I mean, like the obvious story elements, and obviously the presentation was so obvious. In my opinion, it did it so terribly. But going back to the elements of Frozen, like at the end of the day. At least what you got here. Love it or hate it, at the end of the day, you could probably play it at any particular point in time. You could probably wouldn't be able to tell what year it actually was, except for the setting that it's actually in. And so it's just. But you can go back to Olaf as well. Like I'm really glad they went the way that they did with Olaf, because they didn't make him annoying. They didn't make him into like a character who just basically told jokes on the side. He was he was someone who you could engage with the main characters, but didn't engage in an annoying way, and was funny on his own. Like he told not some deadpan jokes, but he kind of like told thing. He could basically just whisper the line, and then you could just he can still get a laugh out of the crowd. It was that type of character, and those type of characters. I think those that don't have to be outlandishly ridiculous. I think obviously if your voice actor is known for basically being outlandish. I mean, for example, like you had his name goes flying out. Peter Kay. When he was playing the police officer in Wallace and Gromit: In Search of the Were-Rabbit. Of course he was going to make jokes about arsing around because that's the type of jokes that he tells on his stage show. So obviously they paid him to his strengths in that regard. But when you don't have to do that, when you have a character where you can make him pleasant, you can make him funny, and you can still make him adorable, and still make him say, oh hey, I like warm hugs, and you just basically play him as not as like a fruity character. At the end of the day, it works. It can work doing that, and I think Olaf stands up and says that this is a fun character that you can have, and he doesn't have to be having to tell like your pop culture references. He doesn't have to sing ridiculous musical numbers like done to rap music. I think he's a good example of that, and I think other movies should follow suit with that. Unfortunately, I don't think Sony or like any of these other. I think Blue Sky Studios are going to do that anytime soon. But it's like any other sane-minded production company that want to make good animation could at least follow Olaf, in regards to like a side character and do something good with it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Sony and Blue Sky and even to an extent DreamWorks would be relying not on original songs, but songs that are like really popular at the time that would be on the soundtrack. Whereas with Disney, and even with Pixar, depending on which movie it is, they would be focusing on original songs, and they would focus on the background music to be original as well, so that they can be able to make it fit within the movie. And there have been cases in which the soundtrack songs have worked in like DreamWorks or Blue Sky Studios, but for the most part with Disney, not only were they able to make it more timeless because they created the songs that fit perfectly with it, but also we don't have to look back on it 20, 30, 40 years from now and just cringe. It's like, oh yeah, that song was popular back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I read events and movies that use popular music back in the day, people say All Star from Smash Mouth now is a massively dated song, but when you put it in Shrek and you bring it in the intro, it fits Shrek's introduction, somebody once told me the world was going to owe me, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed.
Yeah, but the ironic thing is that All Stars by Smash Mouth, that wasn't a song catered to Shrek. I mean, that's not where the song originated from. Believe it or not, the song originated from Mystery Men, if you can believe it.
Mm-hmm. But, at least, as long as it has to be originals of the movie, they basically just have to fit the narrative.
Sure.
Yeah. So, it's all about, if you had, Shrek just, whack open the door and you're just playing death metal, that's not going to have the same impact, is it?
No, of course not.
No.
So Anna finds Elsa and tells her to come back, and she says that she doesn't want to because she feels happy and free where she is. And she even built that giant, snow monster that we saw earlier during the song. And then, when she was trying, and then we even have, some of the guards and some of the royal, some of the people from Arendale, trying to bring Elsa back or trying to capture her so that they could be able to, bring her back so that they could be able to turn summer back to normal as opposed to being winter. And she starts freezing everything, and she starts kind of losing control. And then eventually, when she does find out about it, she does get captured, and then Elsa agrees to come back to try to see if she can fix something, try to fix the weather back to normal. And then, of course, we have the scene in which I think it was either before or after, where we have Anna and Kristoff meeting off the trolls, and then they sing, having a makeover or something like that. And it's the worst song in the movie.
Mm-hmm. So I think in regards to going forward, and obviously, obviously Elsa being up in a castle, and obviously they have the conversation again, and plays that all into a song, and then eventually, Elsa ends up freezing Anna's heart, and obviously then that brings out the countdown of her obviously being being frozen solid. So that plays all into that, and. So obviously there's that involved, and then we get to obviously we get this. Don't you find the troll stuff just kind of like filler?
Yeah, I do. And I understand what they were trying to do. So basically we were introduced to the trolls in the beginning of the movie where they were trying to remove Anna's memories from being struck by Elsa. And we did kind of like get like a bit of a scene with, with Kristoff when he was younger and like being all alone and stuff like that with Sven, and I get that, but yeah, I just found it to be incredibly unnecessary, and just the way that Kristoff is interacting with the trolls, and just the song that comes out of it, I just found it to be really unnecessary. That I felt it could have been that scene could have been done for something else.
Yeah, I just find like the trolls are trolling us. I mean, like I just think that on top of that as well, like they don't really give us much explanation. I mean, they're there to be kind of like to kind of carry narrative, but they don't really do it all that well. They basically just say, oh hey, you've got this princess and she's cursed, and at least they assume that she's they assume that she's cursed. They don't even know too much about that, and all they seem to do is like that's kind of this again. We all complain about also having inconsistent magic, but these trolls also have that inconsistent magic as well, like wiping memories, doing like doing all this other stuff too, like it's like this civilization doesn't of trolls doesn't really make all that over. I mean what's there like that's like all the in movies, you have these people like they have the Na'vi in Avatar, and obviously they have like a purpose within the forest to worship the god Ewa and things like that, and you have like civilizations who live within in these these worlds who have like who hold some kind of purpose, and I don't really know what the trolls' purpose in this movie actually is, except to be kind of like to kind of like keep the story going. I mean, like they don't seem to have their own like personality, or like have their own like reason to exist.
The only troll that I can see existing is the king troll, because he's the one who helped out Elsa and Anna when they were children, and he was the one who told about like this is how you can be able to get the ice shard that came from your heart, because that was what happened later on when Anna was trying to talk to Elsa, saying like come back, and then she struck her by mistake, and she's slowly freezing from the inside, and then this is when we learned about like true love can be able to set you free, and so that's when they decide, hey, we need to go back to the palace and we need to help get Hans to help us out, and that's the only reason why I can see the trolls being relevant to the plot, is because of those things. For the king, at least. Everybody else, no, I don't see any reason.
I thought the king troll would have at least like had the smarts to like say, oh hey, that Prince Hans guy, he's not really a true love. You thought he would be able to see that a mile off. He was able to see everything else a mile off too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so again. He's very inconsistent in that regard. Like, it's like I guess he just wanted him to go away because he's like, he's got some, feminist on Twitter that he's basically trying to, upset, trying to trigger. I don't know. Like,
I don't know either.
Yeah, but it's I mean, I dislike the trolls. I think in the Frozen franchise, I don't think they serve all that much of a purpose, really.
Yeah, I thank God they were reduced a lot in the second movie.
Oh yeah, they were like they basically just to babysit the townspeople who they miraculously managed to get out of the town before all the ground started coming up.
Yes, we'll talk about that later. So yeah, finally, Anna and Kristoff have to ride into Arendale, and everything's like completely frozen down, and she gets dropped off, and then Kristoff and Sven walk away because he thought that Anna loved Hans, and that he wasn't anything to her, so he basically just decided to walk off. And then we have the scene in which when Anna approaches Hans saying like you have to kiss me, only true love can be able to prevent me from freezing, and then he approaches her and says, if only I would love you, or anybody would love you. And then he decides to lock her in because he wants to be the king of Arendelle. With Elsa being captured and thrown into prison and Anna being frozen over, he could be able to have the opportunity to rule a kingdom, because he's like 12th or 16th in the line of his family, and he would never ever have a chance to be the king at all. So this is the only chance he can get for ruling a kingdom. So he essentially lies to the townsfolk saying that she's dead, and Elsa's in prison hearing that news, and so she slowly freezes over, and we even have that really sad scene with Olaf slowly melting, and it's actually a pretty sad scene indeed. Where he was trying to like comfort Anna, making her feel warm while she's freezing from the inside, even though he himself is melting, but he doesn't care because he loved Anna that much.
Well, don't you have feelings? You got feelings for the side character. Like, when was the last time we had that ever at all? I mean, yeah, you could argue that, we have had some side characters who unfortunately have lost their lives, and
yeah, like for example, Ray from Princess and the Frog, where Dr. Facilier, stomped on him.
Oh yeah, you got Bing Bong as well, who was like, obviously forgotten by Riley.
Yeah.
So like there's been some pretty sad endings to some beloved side characters, and they've obviously had some inbound effects. And obviously I'm gonna have an argument obviously for Frozen 2 in regards to Olaf later on in this. But in regards to what we've in regards to Prince Hans, obviously doing the heel turn, if you will, in that. I mean, it was pretty obvious. I think that was kind of what was going to happen, because I think some people who saw the beginning song as like kind of like a villain song, I think some people actually picked up on that, at the very, very beginning of the movie, that this guy's going to be the villain. And so for them, it wasn't too much of a surprise. For everybody else, it was like I could hear like the shocks in the audience when when we go see it. So like it was so for me it was really for those who were quite not very savvy to the Disney franchise, even for those of the kids who this is like their first Disney movie, like for them this was a big shock for them, obviously because storytelling for them is very new, but so it did have the profound impact that it did, but yeah, I mean it was very different, I think, from mind you, you can't really compare it to Gaston in the original Beauty and the Beast, because there were telltale signs that this guy was a bit of a jerk anyway. He was probably have the worst elements of Johnny Bravo in that, so you can obviously tell that he was going to be a big villain in this movie. And so even though he's kind of not what Disney probably would have done 20, 30 years ago, regards back in the day, I'm sure Gaston probably would have been one of the protagonists of the movie, the way that he was portrayed. But
he felt exactly like Brom Bones from what was it? Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Yeah, exactly. Sleepy Hollow. Yeah, The Adventures of Sleepy Hollow. Him being really brash and wanting the girl and all that stuff, while Ichabod was this short, frail man who decides to, prove his love to her by, going over to, Sleepy Hollow and meeting up with the Headless Horseman. So yeah, Gaston is essentially, those really buff protagonists from Disney movies and shorts from the 40s, like Brom or Casey at the Bat or something like that. So, he could have, I'm sure that in the 40s, Gaston would have been a main protagonist. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think nowadays he probably would have been suspended for 30 days for breaking a wellness policy.
Yeah.
But that's a WWE joke. I do apologize.
Oh.
Steroids.
Sure. They are. It's obviously in the eggs. Everybody knows that. So basically, Anna rushes over outside to see if she could be able to find Kristoff, and it's too late. She's completely frozen to death, and then we have the scene in which when Elsa finally finds Anna, and then she hugs her, and then it's revealed as a plot twist that true love does not mean between a guy and a girl. It means there's a different interpretation of true love, a true love between sisters, between family, and that's how she was able to come back to life. And Shrek had pretty much made fun of this to death at this point. True love's first kiss can be able to change you into your true form, in the first movie where Fiona, when she kisses Shrek, she turns into an ogre. Or true love's first kiss in Shrek 2, that if they want to be able to stay human, then they have to kiss each other. Or after.
Which one is probably the more revolutionary? I mean, always the one that I would say kind of would be the plot twist that would turn heads. So the fact that Princess Fiona is still an ogre at the end of the movie, or the fact that it was a hug from a sister that obviously freed Anna from her curse.
I think they're both groundbreaking in different ways because, even dating back to Snow White, where True Love's first kiss was able to awake Snow White from her slumber after she eats the poison apple, or True Love's first kiss was able to awaken Aurora after she pricked her finger from the spinning wheel. So it's already been like a Disney cliche, a fairy tale trope as it was already. So having, both of those things, like true love's first kiss takes you into your true form, like with Shrek, or true love doesn't have to mean between a guy and a girl. It can be, family. That is also incredibly groundbreaking. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say about like which do we think is the more interesting plot twist when it comes to like true love.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that there's not really much to say. I mean, so we have the final scene in which when she Elsa changes everything back to summer, and she resurrects Olaf and has like this snowy cloud, that way he can be able to stay cool and enjoy the summertime. And Elsa and is able to come back as queen and is being loved and respected. We have Anna and Kristoff together, and that's pretty much the end of the story. So
she's really out of the shell, and she asserts her authority. I mean, obviously you get the whole her brushing off Wazelton and sending back her ambassador, and then obviously you got Prince Hans, who obviously gets locked up and is now going to be spending the rest of his time shoveling horse manure for the
pretty much.
Yeah, so it's like I'm really surprised that obviously we're going to go into Frozen 2 in a minute, but are you quite surprised that Prince Hans kind of ended on that note, and we've never seen somewhere down the line we're going to see him again, surely.
I think so, yeah. Like coming back for revenge or something, yeah.
Because obviously we kind of maybe they might do it maybe in a side in a side thing for Disney Plus, maybe, I don't know, but
maybe a short.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some people who do like Prince Hans. I mean, the one thing though is that happened is that I believe one guy, if you remember back in Disney World, I think one guy actually dressed up as Prince Hans and went off to go see the Disney character there. There. I think that changed the policy on regards to people wearing costumes. I think so. I don't know if that's gonna a thing to say from Disney, please forget about Prince Hans, or whether that's the thing with the fans' demand is going to be so huge that somewhere down the line they're going to have to bring Prince Hans back in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember that "Let It Go" and "Happy" from Despicable Me would be playing on the radio all the time. It was such. It was like a earworm at this point. Like that song would be playing like constantly all the time, and people were starting to watch this movie around the Christmas holidays because it had snow in it, even though that technically it's not a Christmas movie, but they still love to watch it around Christmas. And all the kids would be like singing the songs, and they would I remember when I was in church and I was setting up for a play that I was going to be performing in, and I was going to be going on stage for something, and there's like these little kids who are singing "Let It Go" or "Do You Want to Build a Snowman," and they were playing the song on their iPods, and it was just freaking everywhere. And all the times that I've been to Disney World over the years, like or the Disney Store for that matter, I would see there was like a section of Frozen merchandise. Like you had toys, dolls, clothes. Everything was like Frozen everything. And as a kid I also kind of like felt a similar thing for the Lion King, where I saw like Lion King toys and songs like Elton John's version of Circle of Life and Can You Feel the Love Tonight being played on the radio a lot, and storybooks and all that, storybooks and toys and all that stuff was everywhere. So it was like a deja vu for me, because like I said, I hadn't seen a movie that left this much of an impact for Disney since The Lion King, and with Pixar, I saw the same impact with like Finding Nemo.
Yeah, but it's at the point where, some of the Frozen merchandise, they're even releasing really ridiculous stuff for Frozen. I was looking at here, there was Frozen condensed soup.
What?
And also there's and I kid you not, there's also an official Disney Frozen toilet seat.
Oh God, no.
that exists, and also, yeah, there's just it goes to the point where even now, like there was just so much, ridiculous. When you're making like ridiculous Frozen, obviously for ridiculous merchandise for your for your characters and everything like that. You knew that was it. Oh my goodness, don't tell me this is. Oh, sorry, I do apologize. For a minute there, I thought I was about to say there's an Anna and Elsa body pillow. Thankfully, there isn't. And they're actually Anna and Elsa jelly bellies, actually. So they're packets of jelly bellies. So they're all just like colored blue and white and stuff like that. So yeah, so that haunted me just for a second. But yes,
Unofficial Frozen merchandise was even worse. Like I remember years ago when John Tron was talking about like bootleg Disney video games, and he talked about all the bootleg Frozen PC games, like Elsa's Frozen Brain Surgery or Elsa's foot medical care or something like that, or the one where Elsa's baby turns into a zombie.
Yeah, there's even a series of like, I mean, they do this for all sorts of Disney princesses. There's also like a series of like, them getting pregnant and them helping them through the birth and things like that. So there's ridiculous things like that, and so yeah, it's there's a lot of unofficial bootleg stuff out there which you really wish didn't exist, and so.
Yeah. Okay, so right before we talk about Frozen 2, so, between Frozen 1 and Frozen 2, there were a few Frozen shorts. We already talked about Olaf's adventure because that was that was a part of the short that came along with Coco before you got to see it. It's 25 minutes long, if you can believe that. And then there's obviously Frozen Fever, which came out like I think a year or two after the movie came out.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we got two shorts. So we got Frozen Fever, and then obviously we got there was a Christmas one as well.
Like Olaf's Christmas Adventure or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was Olaf's Frozen Adventure, I think it was called. And...
Olaf's Frozen Adventure. Yeah, and yeah, I remember when we were watching Olaf's Frozen Adventure when we were watching Coco, and all the kids were so fidgety, like they wanted to see Coco, and it was lasting for too long. The songs were not memorable, and it was nice to see Olaf and Anna and Elsa and Kristoff and Sven on the screen again. But man, was it too.
Do you ever see that cinema like the whole left row, like behind us, kind of like went to the concession stand, and all the kids were just like running around the aisles, like they had no interest in this whatsoever. And then when finally Coco came along, and finally the movie started, like this was, I mean, I can understand why Disney did it because they wanted to see if they can try and really up sales for Coco, and which for me, like the fact that you're putting on, and don't get me wrong, like back in the day, they used to release B movies, obviously before the main feature would come along, so you kind of got like a double feature. So like those are tried and tested ways of getting like a movie to be really to be really popular. But at the end of the day, like everyone just kind of looks at the Frozen shot with Olaf, and just nobody was invested in it at all. And it got to the point where Disney decided to just shelve the whole thing and basically just said, okay, Coco's just going to appear on its own, and it did well on its own steam. Then it didn't need Frozen whatsoever. So and it kind of blew back very badly on Frozen. I think it just kind of let people think, if anything, it left a bad omen to advertisers, to cinemas, to say that the Frozen phenomenon was coming to an end. And so it was a very bad way of doing business for Disney to do what they did. So.
Yeah, exactly. Like they thought that Frozen's popularity was going to last for so long, and they thought that, hey, people still like Frozen. Why don't we still have all these Frozen shorts and merch? It was kind of like what they did for Toy Story. It's like after Toy Story 3, let's have the Toy Story shorts, like the Toy Story the time, like tiny toys and the toys that time forgot and all those things, and then eventually we had Toy Story 4. So yeah, I guess that maybe they thought that it was the same thing, but they didn't seem to take into account that all the other Disney movies that came out after Frozen were still like really, really good. We got Zootopia, we got Wreck-It Ralph, we got Moana. So I mean, if Frozen was like the only good Disney movie and everything else sucked, I could see they would try to milk Frozen for all of its worth. Kind of similar to how, around the late 2000s that Nickelodeon pretty much had nothing except for SpongeBob, and then they decided to milk SpongeBob for all it's worth. I can see that Disney would do that, but all the other stuff that Disney was doing, they were at their second renaissance. They were at the revival era. That this is when they were releasing hit after hit after hit after hit. And so something like Frozen being like pushed into our throats constantly was what many people felt that it was just getting too overwhelming, and people were starting to hate Frozen because of that.
Yeah,
I was starting to hate Frozen because of that.
Here's the thing about this, and this is something that Disney doesn't seem to learn very well, I think, with some of its franchises, and this is this: less is more. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, I know there's been the Aladdin television series, but they didn't go straight. As far as I'm aware, they they didn't go overkill on Aladdin. There was something there, for them to have a TV series and things like that. There was some things that they could do with it, and the same with Beauty and the Beast as well. Yeah, they did the whole, what was it, Belle's Christmas Story or something like that, or
Belle's Magical Christmas and.
Beauty
and the Beast, the Enchanted Christmas, and then Belle's Magical World. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then also they did the whole. They did that what was it on Disney Junior? Was it where they did the whole Sing Me a Story with Belle or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, they did that whole thing as well. But it wasn't like they absolutely went overkill with the thing. With and also on top of that as well, the timing was always was the best thing. Was the best thing about some of the way that you release these things. Frozen Fever was understandable. In regards to releasing a short, and people were going to be really invested in that. Frozen, it was a Christmas special, wasn't it? Last time.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So there was warrant for that. Also as well, it's Frozen, so of course you would put that at Christmas. But I mean, in regards to what they did with Olaf's story and things like that, I mean, Disney really needs to be careful with how they release things, because they'll end they sometimes in regards to the way they treat the release schedule and the way that they tie things together. Coco had nothing to do with Frozen whatsoever. Absolutely nothing to do with it. So it had no excuse to exist really in front of that movie, except to basically waste everybody's time. So if this was something to launch Disney Plus with, or if this was something to say oh hey we can watch this exclusively online on YouTube or something like that, just keep the kids quiet on the iPad for a little while, then great. But it's to me when you make something an inconvenience, people are going to hate it. And so it's this is the reason why you have to be very careful with some things that you release and in the way that you release them, because it the public perception can give you a massive backlash.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, that's pretty much our discussion on Frozen. So, overall, I can definitely understand why this movie was a huge hit amongst, Disney, especially for the kids who watched it. I mean, I can, the songs are great, the characters are great, the animation's beautiful, and it does have a lot of interesting twists and turns into the story. So I can understand why, a lot of people loved it, and it became the most popular Disney movie for a while until we had the others, as mentioned earlier. So, I guess if there's nothing much to say, then we can switch over to Frozen 2.
Yeah, and so I mean, Frozen 2 was definitely going to be a big test for Disney, I think, because obviously they've come off this phenomenon. They've made billions out of merchandise, out of everything. This was going to be their biggest anticipated sequel, at least in the eyes of Frozen fans. It was going to be anyway. So they had to try and deliver a good story, give us some good characters, give us some good music, and it's going to need to basically blow everyone away with what it's going to do. And I got to be honest with everybody. I look at this movie. Me and Patricia went to go see it whilst I was in America, and I've got to be honest with everybody. I felt like it was. I mean, I can see why it exists, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be one of those movies I'm going to remember. Besides the first one that we saw.
Yeah, so right before we discuss about it, major spoilers ahead. If you have not seen Frozen 2, go watch it in the theaters and then come back and listen to us talk about it. So, okay.
Movie you're going to listen anyway, then you're going to find out you're not really missing much.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I guess we can get started on Frozen 2. So this movie takes place 3 years after the first movie, where the characters are a little bit older, and it goes into the setting of like the characters are settling in and they're happy with where they are. So Anna and Elsa are content with where they are. So are so is Olaf, and then we have one of the biggest we have the first plot point in the movie where Kristoff wants to ask Anna for marriage, and he is practicing in front of Sven and very nervous about whether he'll accept it or not. And basically, that does play off a couple of times throughout the movie, even though that's not like really like a major focus. But the real focus of the movie is that Elsa has been hearing a voice out in the ocean, and she's being called into it, and she wants to know what's going on. And then there's like this huge force that is attacking Arendale and kind of like shifting it off. And then they have to find out what the what's going on and how they could be able to fix it. And we get even more flashbacks with the parents where Anna and Elsa's mother is telling them the story about this enchanted forest and the tribe of Northuldria, and how Elsa and Anna's grandfather were able to make peace with Northuldria, and how they were able to make this dam so that they can be able to unite the kingdoms. And then all of a sudden there's this massive fight that happened, and the whole forest was covered in this fog, and they were never seen again. So it has like these stories about these spirits of earth, wind, water, and fire. And there's basically the story about like that, and they assume it's just like this fairy tale that they would listen to. But then Elsa starts figuring out that maybe this fairy tale was real after all, and she wants to go and investigate Northuldria and see what's happening.
So it's that. I mean, I'm trying to find if there's actually something you can really compare it to, really. Like, unfortunately, the only memory that kind of comes into my mind is kind of like, is a Ravenholm out of Half-Life 2, which isn't really a good comparison, really. But, when Alice basically tells you, oh, well, we don't go down there anymore. And so,
yeah. Well, while we were watching the movie, you were whispering into my ear about, like, the whole elements, and we find out later on that there is a fifth spirit who controls everything.
And so basically, for those of you who do not know, I mean, for those of you, I'm surprised you really don't know if you're a Nickelodeon fan on Old School Lane, but I mean, like, obviously there's Avatar: The Last Airbender, which obviously tells the story of Aang being the Avatar and trying to unite the nations of fire, air, and
earth and water.
More, yeah, and so and all that changed after the Fire Nation attacked, and so like it kind of tries to tell this story but does it wrong. I think the idea of like building up Elsa into kind of like this it's made me wonder, like, if they did look at Nickelodeon's Avatar: The Last Airbender and kind of looked at Avatar Aang and thought, we should probably make Elsa that kind of like character. And maybe have her as like, the Avatar, like, she's no longer going to be the Queen of Arendelle. She's now going to basically be, I don't know, God. I don't know. Like, that's the only the thing I can think about, really. That's that it was inspired by, the Nickelodeon franchise Avatar: The Last Airbender. But they always done this story, but again, I just feel like it's just underwhelming. In my opinion, like you got more, you got the concept of fire being done by this character who looks similar to like the chameleon out of Tangled.
Tangled, yeah.
Exactly.
And, you have this fire salamander who is the fire spirit, and oh my god, I mean, you for those who you remember the reactions that the audience got. There was like a family of kids below our row, and when they saw the salamander for the first time, when he like got out of his fire form when Elsa cooled him down with ice, and they saw like how cute he was. It's like, oh my god, it's so adorable! Like, oh jeez, man. Like, we get it.
All the kids in the audience, the likelihood is they probably not seen that many Disney films, so like then that probably like would have been like something different for them. They'll probably look at they'll probably one day will watch Shrek 2 and probably look at what Puss in Boots did and probably think, oh yeah, this is a concept we're familiar with, and probably it'll rub off on them. Maybe.
Sure. And speaking of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the whole, division of the tribes, it kind of reminds me of one of the episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Great Divide, where you have the Zhangs and the Ganjins who are divided, and Aang tries to find a way to unite them together, even though that they hated each other for over like 100 years. So, I mean, it's nowhere near as offensive as the ending of Avatar: The Last Airbender was, where Aang lied to the tribe, saying that he knew the founders and that they were little kids and that they played a game of ball, and that was where the argument happened or something like that. And I mean, it's not, but yeah, I could kind of like see the similarities between the two with, the tribe members of North Uldra and the leftover soldiers from Arendale who were trapped in the village for like 38 years after the fog.
It's just one episode. I think it's like the entire concept. It's like it's the idea that there's all these elements that are out there, and Elsa just happens to have like mastered like one of these powers. It wouldn't surprise me like in later future future Frozen films that we see that oh hey, here's a queen that can weld fire. Here's a queen that can weld air. Here's a queen that can control the ground. There's other spirits out there as well. Like it decides to like expand the Frozen universe out to kind of like other worlds, if you will. So like that seems to be. I mean, I could be totally wrong. I mean, maybe they might turn around and say, oh hey, maybe Doug's the way we need to go, and maybe they need to have like a queen version of Quail Man or something like that. I don't know. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like there's. I think whatever trope I think they go with next in regards to Frozen, whether they stick with like the line that they're going down now, or whether they're just going to like throw us into a completely new situation and like kind of wreck the continuity a little bit and try and tell like another story which is like borrowed from something else. I don't know, but it's to me. I mean, like if I had to choose between like the story of Avatar and the story of Frozen 2, I mean, I've got to be honest with you. I'm gonna probably be that foamy mouth guy every time I watch Hank do something like crazy with air power. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that so yeah, basically we have the different elemental spirits. We have the fire salamander, we have the gust of wind that turns into a tornado but turns into a light wind. Then I guess the closest thing to a villain would be like the earth giants, where they're these giant stone creatures that kind of like wreck everything and are very dangerous. I guess that's the closest thing to a villain, because we had I guess it's kind of hard to say like who's the villain in this, but we'll go into that later. And then obviously the water spirit is the water horse that Elsa meets up with throughout the middle of the movie, where she tries to cross over from she tries to cross over from North Uldra over to the other island, and I think that it was Otto Holland. That's what it was called. So yeah, Otto Holland is the location where she can be able to learn about the past. That way she can be able to learn about what happened with how she could be able to remove the fog, how she could be able to restore peace into the village. And she finds out, and then there's this interesting fact where Olaf was like constantly saying a bunch of facts about like water can retain memories. And we have this one scene in which when Anna and Elsa find her parents' ship, and she is able to gather all the water from their memories from the night that the night that they passed away. And they did pass away from a severe storm, but they weren't going over to meet up with another kingdom. They were going over to Otto Holland so that they can be able to find out where the source of Elsa's powers are coming from. And this is when Elsa blames herself for her parents' death.
Did you get the feeling like when you saw that when you saw that ship, it made you think like, oh my god, are they actually going to make it where there's a possibility the parents might be alive?
Yeah, like, I thought that was going to happen actually.
Yeah, I thought like and mind you, it was pretty spooky when when Elsa found out from Olaf that the water can retain memories, and so she uses all the seawater like in the ship to kind of like relive basically their deaths. Pretty much, and so it's like, yeah. So, I mean that bit was pretty. That was pretty. I'm surprised they went that far. To be quite honest with you, and so you could tell from from like the deafening silence of the audience, like you could tell that the kids were losing a little bit of interest, and then all of a sudden when the ship kind of like came into focus, and it's kind of like, oh my goodness, that's it. It's like
Yeah, and I think like between that, I mean, I know that we had some like funny scenes with Olaf where he was trying to find Anna, Elsa, Kristoff, and Sven when they separated, and then you have that one scene where he was calling out Samantha or something,
Mhm.
and it's actually funny because Josh Gad on Twitter found somebody named Samantha, and he took a picture with her saying, "Hey, look, I finally found Samantha."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, there was the bit when they found the people who were like lost in the mist, and then Olaf then decides to like tell the entire story of like the last movie.
Oh, that was hilarious, by the way. All the kids were laughing and laughing and laughing.
Oh, that was just it. It was actually really his delivery was perfect as well. Like the fact
I think Olaf may be one of my favorite things in this movie.
exactly like yeah, like in a way. I mean, you looked at Olaf and like you can kind of tell like he was written better than probably any of the other characters. I think they walked into Frozen 2 saying like, okay, we know definitely what we want to do with Olaf, but in regards to everybody else, we'll just play it through. Like.
Yeah, Kristoff was so underutilized.
Hmm.
And even though that he does get a song at the middle of the movie where he's talking about like whether he should propose to Anna or not, and I get that, but still, I mean, just there should have been more of a build up to him just besides proposing to Anna, saying hey, will you marry me? It kind of reminds me of Bernard proposing to Miss Bianca and the Rescuers Down Under.
Hmm. So it's yeah. So I think in regards to Frozen 2, in regards to like the positive characters we have in this, Olaf definitely stands out in this, and
Oh yeah, yeah. All the stuff that Olaf does is amazing, especially that scene in which when, where Elsa was going through a similar thing to Anna in the first movie, where she finally enters into Otto Holland and she, starts freezing from the inside, and then and her powers disappear, and then Olaf slowly starts to melt, and then he tells Anna, well, you're gonna have to find the exit on your own, and he starts melting away, and then Anna sings her song, and she's talking about like I'm in depression right now. I don't want to move. I don't want to do anything. And then slowly she starts building up her strength to walk over to the exit where she sings something a really, she starts singing her song and stuff like that. So I guess that, it's actually a pretty risky thing that they're able to sing something as like depression in a Disney movie.
yeah, that was I will admit that was one thing there, but in regards to the way they dealt with Olaf, I mean, like if you ask me, like they should have probably kept him dead. I mean, to be quite honest with you, like have like a real sacrifice in this movie. I mean, it's. I don't think you're going to get any better performance, I think, out of Olaf except out of this movie. I think, and so like it would have made more. It's like in the end of the day, I think if Pixar, I think, was probably getting involved in this, I think they probably would have said, you don't need Olaf anymore. This is going to be like his kind of like his magnum opus, if you will, and then after that, just have him kind of like fade away, and then obviously have people miss him, and obviously that will leave a more profound impact on the movie. Everything like that. I mean, like, hopefully they probably won't go. I mean, what's the soap opera where they killed off one of the main characters and then like for the next couple of seasons they turned it like into like a dream sequence and brought him back.
Oh, Dallas.
Dallas, okay, then so hopefully they wouldn't have had that reaction. Then the next couple of Frozen movies it would have all just been like a dream in like Anna's head, and then all of a sudden she'll walk into the shower and find Olaf in there or something like that. Yeah, I just in regards to like Olaf, I think this should have probably been like his Velma and Louise going off the cliff. Like if that's a really good reference to make, I don't know, but to me like the fact that he's going to be kind of continuing on, I don't think they're going to do anything better with Olaf. If they do, then kudos. But I think for me this was probably his best appearance, like out of everything. It definitely made up for his shortcomings in the short that he had in front of Coco.
Oh yeah, yes. Ugh. Okay, so continuing on. So basically, Anna learns from Elsa, from her spirit that the reason why the dam that their grandfather built was actually to keep their powers hidden away and to keep it weaker so that they can be able to control them as opposed to peace. So the only way that they can be able to free the village from the fog and for them to finally see clear skies is for them to destroy the dam. And so that's what they decided to do, and this is where the earth monsters play in, where Anna is forcing them to throw rocks so that they can be able to destroy the dam. And so then we have all the other characters trying to get the earth monsters to do the same as well.
Yeah, we might have skipped a little bit ahead, but by the way, there's also like these forest people that currently exist in this world as well. They were trying to basically, Arendale was trying to make peace with, or wasn't trying to actually make peace with. They're actually trying to control them and try and suppress them, and obviously killed a load of them too, from the sounds of it. So
yeah, exactly. So one of them, so you basically do have the villagers from you have the villagers that they interact with, and you have let's see if I can remember their names. One of them was named Matthias. I'm sorry, it was Ryder. Yeah, Ryder. So Ryder is one of the villagers, and he has a whole bunch of reindeer, and he interacts with Kristoff, and then you have that one scene where they're like trying to have this huge proposal involving with a ton of reindeer, and you have Kristoff singing his own personal song called Into the Woods, where, as mentioned before, about the song about him proposing to Anna. And then you have Ryder's sister, whose name was Honey Marin, who doesn't really play like a lot into the story. It's actually funny because I remember rumors when there were the whole rumors about like wanting to make Elsa a gay character, that maybe that this will be her lover or something, which I'm glad it's not.
She did. I think wasn't she the character who broke the news that their mother was actually part of their tribe, and also was a woman who actually saved their father as well. So like it was they did play somewhat of a role in continuing on the backstory, but if anything they kind of made it more complicated when they really thought about it. Like it raises more questions than it does answer them. I think I would definitely say.
Yeah, I think from what I remember, before we watched the movie, I was starting to read reviews online about how people felt about Frozen 2, without spoilers, of course, and they pretty much said that the plot was like super convoluted, and what made the original movie a lot memorable for a lot of people was because it was a lot easier to understand. So I guess for a lot of people, it's like why Princess and the Frog wasn't as much of a success as Tangled. Tangled is much more of an easier story to understand, while Princess and the Frog has this convoluted subplot about like how to turn Prince Naveen and Tiana back into human after being turned into frogs.
Well, at least it was better than the explanation for the conflicts in the Phantom Menace when it was all about taxes and politics. So it's
God, no.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, in regards to other ways that conflicts have been explained, I think this is probably the simplest thing. Like their grandfather was basically just an evil bastard. It's like that's basically an explanation for that. So, mind you, it was pretty surprising given the fact that everyone thought the Kingdom of Arendelle was so innocent and so such to that, and now here you have there's this dark menace now from generations ago, which is the reason why Arendelle is kind of still standing. So
yeah, exactly, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that if we don't have like a legit villain, I mean, other than the rock monsters, I guess that in the past, I guess that their grandfather was the villain. I guess that's another thing that we can point out about, like, trying to correct the past and trying to move, ahead of the future. Throughout the movie, they, we had Elsa not wanting to follow the voice because she's happy where she is. She doesn't want anything to change, and neither does Elsa. Elsa and Anna don't want anything to change because they're happy with where they are. And then we have the past portion of, North Aldria, where, the past wasn't as good as it seemed to be. Things that happened before wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. And I think that's a really interesting story about, like, if you're nostalgic about your past or you want things to stay the way they are, sometimes you have to take a big risk, and you have to know that there's better things for you out there. Or, sometimes the past that you think was like, very nostalgic or very happy wasn't as happy as you think it was. Some things happened back then that could affect you. So it actually does paint a pretty interesting story about, like, the past and the future and taking risks and, standing up for yourself and trying to accomplish obstacles and stuff like that. So I think that that's actually really good storytelling and lessons for kids.
Hmm. So I mean, like the fact, yeah. So like, don't always rule out your history. It's always like yeah, it is kind of like a bit of a in a way, telling to people like you should never. You should always second guess your like your history and things like that. Like for example, like Winston Churchill. People see him as like this hero because obviously he defeated Hitler in the in the Second World War and things like that. But he also did some pretty disgraceful things as well during the British Empire. So like it's like so you shouldn't always look at your history as like this glowing thing. There are some faults in your heroes, that you should always kind of like also keep in mind as well, and not always look glowingly upon the past as like this perfect this perfect thing. A lot of bad stuff happened in the past as well. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that for the most part, the one thing that I have to give to this movie is that almost kind of like akin to like Toy Story 4. We didn't expect Elsa to be staying around in North Aldra. We thought that as soon as she was done clearing up the fog and she was done setting peace into the village, and they were just going to go back and they were going to live off their normal lives. But no, she realized that she was the fifth spirit, and that she has to be the bridge between these two nations, and she has to be able to help things through. And so that means that she's not going to be seeing her sister as much, and Anna's going to be the new queen of Arendelle. And I like that. I like that they were able to like break things up a bit, saying like, hey, sometimes, things cannot just be the same anymore. You have to be able to, change things so that they can be able to, she can be able to have like, basically, things have to change in order for life to be better. And I think that that was actually pretty smartly told. And I also do like that Anna gets to be the queen and she has to learn all these new responsibilities, but at the same time she still has her playful self when she sends the letter over to Gale, the wind spirit, saying like, hey, we're going to be playing charades tonight, come on over. And then you have Elsa going back and forth between them, knowing that their relationship was never going to be over, that even though that she's far away, she's still going to be, close to her sister, because, we've seen that like throughout the movie that, they have become a lot more closer than they have in the first movie, in which she was really distant from her because of her powers. And then, they started to like slowly get to know each other for like the first time in a long time. So yeah, I think that the relationship between Anna and Elsa is really strong in this. I just wish that, the relationship between Anna and Kristoff was a little bit stronger, especially since Kristoff doesn't really get a lot of screen time, even though he does get that song a little bit later on in the film, and we do see him from time to time trying to propose to Anna. But there are some times in which like some characters get focused. The characters that are focused are not as interesting. Some of the parts of the story is really convoluted. And I guess the last thing that we need to talk about are the songs. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the songs, Aaron?
I can probably remember some bits of like Into the Unknown, but besides that, like I mean, I can at least name like do you want to build a snowman? Love is an open door. Let it go. And at least I can name 3 songs from the original Frozen movie. In this, I can only name like 1. And,
there's Into the Unknown, Lost in the Woods.
Songs in this, I think, there actually are in the original Frozen.
There's a lot of songs in this. I think there's like twice the songs in this movie than compared to the old one, because I think in the first movie wasn't there like 5 or 6 songs, and then in this one I think there's like what, 8 or 9.
Yeah, you say about it, that one like Lost in the Forest, like that song, like that just to me kind of like it kind of felt like a bit of a jump the shark moment, because obviously like the moose starts talking for real, and then obviously there's all singing in the background, and I don't know, it just kind of makes you kind of feel like a fever dream that I had just watching it all, and so like it just kind of felt so surreal. Like I don't think of like the only other thing I can compare it to. I mean, the one thing I can probably compare it to is when Tom and Jerry sang for the first time, probably. That's like,
yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was also another song from Elsa when she sang "Show Yourself" when she was hearing more of the voice when she reached over to the island and she was trying to learn more about how she got her powers, who she is, and what she can learn from the island and the past that all the secrets are holding. So that song was actually pretty
You know, also that scene, I kind of also thought, oh my goodness, is this a bit where they're going to basically steal something from Superman, and this is going to be Elsa's Fortress of Solitude? You know, like this is going to be like a thing. It's like it's like yeah, well, okay, someone got some kryptonite in case we need to stop Elsa or something like that, or like
Yeah. I think Into the Unknown is going to be this movie's Let It Go. I think that's going to be the song that everybody's going to remember.
Here's the thing about this. I was thinking about it. What is Elsa's weaknesses in this?
Elsa's weaknesses. Oh man.
Besides, I mean, obviously she looks like she can be defeated in some way, but I mean, obviously she can't
Well, I mean,
take.
she is human, so she was able to freeze when she got deeper and deeper into the cave. So she could be able to become cold herself. She's not immune to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think that yeah. So I guess she probably is in that regard, but well, I don't know. So to me, like, people complain about Elsa like having inconsistent powers and obviously being like maybe overly powerful, maybe, and so that's something that's probably a legitimate complaint in regards to Elsa. That you can see that she does have weaknesses. I don't think she has like any real weaknesses if you think about it. So like that's why I think maybe they should probably do a thing where like maybe she's someone gains control over her and she kind of like turns evil, and then Elsa, sorry, Anna and Kristoff and everyone has to kind of like stop her from doing something really dumb or something like that. I don't know, and then actually say, oh, this is the way we can stop Elsa, and these are her weaknesses. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
These are kind of, I mean, I think trying to get some consistency with the magic, I think, is kind of like out the door at this stage. I think probably trying to give us some maybe some real weaknesses, like Superman has kryptonite, other people have all sorts of other weaknesses too, like
yeah, exactly. Like Superman has kryptonite. Batman is a regular human being, and he can be taken down if he's overwhelmed with everything. You have Spider-Man, similar thing as well. Yeah, I mean, all superheroes have their particular weakness. You're absolutely right. But Elsa is not a superhero. She's just a person who just so happens to have ice powers. But it's not like she uses it like as like a superpower. She doesn't like go over to different kingdoms and save everybody. She just remember in the first movie she didn't like having them because she couldn't control them. But in the second movie she's a little bit more accepting of her power, and she was able to control it just a little bit. And then I think when throughout the later part of the movie, when she finds out that she can be able to like save people from the fire spirit and the wind spirit, and she finds out about like the village North Uldra, and she learns that she is the fifth spirit herself. I think that she becomes a little bit more open and understanding towards her powers, and I think that her being queen for 3 years and all the people love her for it, for her powers, and loving her for who she is, being the queen and all that stuff. I think she became a little bit more accepting for who she was.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that there's not really much to say about the movie. I think the only thing that we need to talk about is that we saw the trailers for Onward and Soul, and we'll be talking about that later on in Pixmix when we get around to it.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, in regards to like that, yeah, we were reserving some Pixmix, I believe. So.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it, unless you have anything to say about the movie.
Besides that, I mean, Frozen 2, I can see why it exists, but I mean, in regards to like me going out to see it, me going out of my way to see it again, I better be honest with you, probably not. I mean, at this stage, like, it's doing really phenomenally well at the box office at this stage, and so I kind of like, I'm just trying to have a look at the latest numbers and seeing what basically what it's doing at the moment. But I can guarantee you this, like, the fact that, oh, hang on a second, so as of this podcast yesterday, apparently Frozen 2 nears $300 million at the domestic box office. So
yeah, I mean, very similar to the original Frozen that came out in 2013, and it being like the standout movie of that year. It's kind of hard to say about whether this movie will be the standout of 2019 because we already had How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World and Toy Story 4 coming out as well, and even the sequel to the Lego Movie. And yeah, we did have our fair share of stinkers like Arctic Dogs and Wonder Park and Ugly Dolls. So yeah, there have been, those movies, but for the most part, it's going to be really interesting about how time will see Frozen 2.
Well, I think the Frozen fandom will definitely remind us that Frozen 2 exists. I think,
Sure.
yeah, at this stage, Frozen is its own thing. It's its own world. It has its own dedicated fans. It's, Disney is aware of that and exploiting them for as much as they can. And so I think, and also that will continue now, given the fact that now I just learned that it's now done 742 million at the box office, so it's been a phenomenal success in regards to obviously being, and no doubt it's probably going to make far more than its original budget, no doubt about that. But this is a big thing. It's going to keep continuing. I think it's going to potentially get bigger. Maybe I'd be very surprised if there's not a Frozen 3. I think there will be a third Frozen movie, as far as I'm concerned. Whether I should call it Frozen 3, I don't know, because it's quite a bit of a mouthful to say. But in regards to, that, I think, in regards to, shorts, no doubt we'll probably get more of them too. And we should see how Frozen goes into the future. Do they continue making the characters older? Do they even go with another generation of characters? They have, they say, oh, hey, there was this... Elsa and Anna are probably themselves gone from this world, and now it's basically their ancestors now that are basically dealing with whatever the fallout is of these movies. Maybe, I'm not sure. So
Yeah. It's kind of hard to say, but I think that I think that for the most part, I think it's going to be a few years before we get a Frozen 3, or maybe this will be the end of it, because I can assure you that the way that the movie was playing off, that there has to be more movies, to kind of branch out. I think that they're trying to open up more into the world of Frozen. In the first movie, we only had Arendale, and now we've, got introduced to North Aldria, and we got introduced to, the island where the past is shown. So I think that there'll probably even be more locations to visit with more characters. And maybe, you were saying earlier about maybe we'll get introduced to people who have different powers and abilities.
Well, who knows? Disney have Marvel now, so I'd be very surprised if there isn't a comic series or explaining all the for all the different characters that are now in the Frozen world, giving them all backstories and things like that, and telling them all in comic book form. That'd be a smart thing to do and get some more sales. So
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, Disney have basically they've got nothing to lose with Frozen at the moment. It's doing phenomenally well at the box office. It's may not necessarily be the best Disney film of all time. It's probably just going to be one of those, it's going to be existing here, and people are going to probably remember it the same way that they remember other, other older movies. And so for me, I think there'll always be a Frozen fandom, and they'll keep reminding us of it. And no doubt, I believe in another couple of years' time we will see a Frozen 3, and I think that will be whether that will be the end of the. Whether if that does phenomenally well as well, I think we'll probably see more Frozen movies after that. So I think Disney will have a winner here, and I think they're going to basically exploit it to as far as they can go until they can probably do no more with it. So
yeah, and I'm actually really curious about their next Disney movie. Their next Disney movie, I think, is Raya and the Last Dragon or something. From what I remember, Raya and the Last Dragon. That's coming out in 2020, and it actually looks really interesting. I've seen concept art of it, and I'm actually curious to see how well that turns out.
Yeah, well, they got plenty coming on the way. Obviously, unfortunately, they've got the next Milan movie coming out. I'm not really looking forward to that too much. And Wood obviously is going to be their next, Pixar, moneymaker machine. And and then they've also got Jungle Cruise. They got this other movie called Armentus Fowl, and also they got Soul, the one and only Ivan, Raya and the Last Dragon, as you said before, and also they got a few other side projects on the go as well, like the Eternals, West Side side story in the Death on the Nile. So, Disney, they're not afraid to crack, a couple more movies out and give us something to go with. And also with Disney Plus now upon us, I mean, no doubt there's going to be a lot of stuff they're going to probably want to bring out on there too. So, Disney are riding the wave, and no doubt we're all going to ride with them. So, there we go.
Exactly. All right, then I think that should be the end of this. So, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on by.
No problem.
All right, so let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on both the original Frozen and Frozen 2. Which one was your favorite? What's your favorite song? Who's your favorite character? All that stuff. Do you want to see a Frozen 3? Or do you think that we've had our Frozen animated series? Or do you think that we've had enough at this point? So that's it. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.